need to talk about something important, and that's inflation and the cost of things going up in price for the last 4 years. Everything cost double, triple, quadruple what it was back in 2019. That brings me to this video here today. Now, I have people all the time ask me, why can't prices just stay the same? The other question I'm always getting is, when will prices and the cost of living come back down? Now, I want to discuss this with you, so let's get started. Please like and share and subscribe to this channel. I really appreciate you doing that. Now, let's begin. In 2022, much of the world experienced a period of uncommonly high inflation, with the US, the UK, and the Eurozone all peaking at around 10% inflation, meaning that prices on average were a full 10% higher than the year before. It was absolutely awful, and there were a lot of economists out there who thought that that would never happen. They actually thought that you could print trillions of dollars and have consumers spend all that money into the economy, and it wasn't going to cause inflation because everything was shut down and it really didn't have an immediate effect yet. But people kept thinking all was well, and then suddenly there was skyrocketing inflation, and everyone was thinking that the price increases would just be temporary. Then they began asking, why aren't prices coming down? Well, because everything was shut down, and as soon as things began opening up, and as soon as people started spending the money that they were saving in bank accounts and spending the money the government was printing and handing out, that's when demand went through the roof. It wasn't just the monetary policy of printing money, but it was also the fact that supply chains were disrupted during the shutdowns. And so when things were backed up and they can't satisfy enough demand for the products once people started buying. So prices started going up as a result. And you had a whole bunch of backlog in the production and the shipping with a lot of demand coupled with a lot of extra money being pumped into the economy. And that's what caused inflation to go through the roof, and the prices that we are seeing today. If you were to listen to and read inflation-related content in the media, you'll keep hearing this: a little inflation is a good thing. A little inflation now would be a good thing. Everybody wants a little inflation. Then comes the question, if rising prices hurt seemingly everyone, why can't they just stay the same? Why can't inflation just be zero? When there is no ability to pass on the higher costs of production and wages, etc., people are going to start hoarding their money. Look at Japan. Japan is a fantastic example of an economy where it's been so ingrained in their entire culture to save money. Don't spend it. Hoard cash for a rainy day. As a result, you have deflation. And when prices begin to come down, consumer psychology says that the consumer or the customer would then be less likely to spend their money because their money is going to go further the next day. Just imagine if your money is gaining 10% in value every year. So in essence, everything is getting 10% cheaper the longer you wait to buy it. So unless you need to go and spend money now, it makes more sense just to say, instead of buying that flat screen TV today, I'm going to wait a month because it'll be a little cheaper. Instead of the car I want to buy today, I'll wait a month. It'll be a little cheaper. Everything's going down in price. Now, a healthy economy requires a regular and natural flow of money from earnings into the production and purchase and living expenses and replacement of essentials and satisfying wants. We need some form of spending in the economy to push us forward because we want people spending, but we don't want people spending too much. Overspending destroys everything. So there's got to be a fine balance. Now, the last few decades, that balance has been about 2% inflation for the most part. In times when prices are generally rising, people tend to expect them to rise further, and that encourages people to spend money now on big durable purchases like cars or appliances, thus avoiding having to pay more for the same thing later. Now, companies make more money, which means more people have jobs, and that means more demand and therefore higher prices. It's okay if prices rise, so long as wages also rise in proportion. You'll still be able to afford the same goods if your wages keep pace with inflation. Emphasis on the if. Now, I discussed the value of budgeting, keeping an emergency fund, and investing in all my other videos on this channel. And I encourage you to watch them, to use them, and use the concepts that I teach in them. Now, in order to stimulate the economy to a certain degree, we forced people to spend some money and invest it, because otherwise their money is going to lose value. Some of the purchasing power of that money will be lost every year unless they spend it and invest it. Now, in order for that money to be spent, you need to have some incentive to go out and buy that new shirt or dress. Because if you wait, the money will actually cost more later on. For example, if I have $100 today, it's going to be only worth about $98 in the coming year. And after that, possibly just $90, and so on. So at least it's something you could take into consideration versus a 10% inflation, and people just can't seem to adjust to that, and they can't keep up. Now, the government does have tools to combat rising inflation. They usually shift things here in the USA by raising interest rates, which makes all borrowing, including credit cards and bank loans, more expensive. One of the best ways to combat this, though, is by saving and investing your money. Because when you invest it in certain assets, for the most part, those assets on a long-term basis tend to keep pace with inflation, and you can see your money and asset values increase each year, or at least over the long term. Now, I also discuss fantastic ways that you can begin investing and what to invest in my other videos on this channel. Please watch them and use them. Now, what happens when prices fall instead of rising? That's called deflation. And falling prices honestly sound pretty good, but deflation can also introduce another kind of cycle, a deflationary spiral. The deflationary spiral, to the economists, is the worst case scenario. Because as prices tend to go down, we do think that as consumers, that would be a great thing. Things get less expensive. Our money is now more valuable than it was a month ago. The issue, though, is that if money is now more valuable and prices drop, how will that affect employment? How does that affect GDP? How does that affect investments? How does that affect hiring? There are so many nuances that come with falling prices, even though it sounds great on the surface. Now, when prices fall, what is the damage to the economy? That's something that you don't want. The last time inflation dipped below 2%, the U.S. brought interest rates down to 0.5%. And after bottoming out for a bit, it seemed to work because inflation inched back up. But inflation hadn't come up. The government would have had limited options because their rates were already getting almost to zero. And then things could get very dangerous. There was actually a brief moment there when the market was pricing in what is called negative interest rates. So basically, the Federal Reserve could lower the interest rates so low to the point where they would pay you to borrow money. Now, I know it sounds like a really crazy concept, but just imagine that you could borrow $100,000 and then pay back only $98,000 instead of the $100,000 and profit by $2,000 simply by borrowing money. You may be saying, but that could never happen. But there are some countries where it has happened, and it destroys the economy. Japan experienced just such a problem. The rates were at zero or below zero, and people were taking out loans and purchasing the yen at deflationary prices, and then profiting when they paid off the loan or sold the yen. It's a wild concept, but some countries have experienced it, and some countries have it now. Now, I can't imagine the United States implementing such a policy. However, it's possible. Anything is possible at this point. I don't think things are ever going to get so bad to force that to happen here. But we have experienced some really crazy policies here as well. There is constantly a risk of inflation dropping down into the deflation zone, triggering a bad cycle. And the way to prevent that is to have it sit just a little bit higher than 0%. A little inflation is usually a good thing for the economy. Think of how difficult it would be to consider buying a home, investing in real estate, investing in currencies, really any investment, if you were concerned about values decreasing rather than increasing at some point. Now, I think the Federal Reserve will slowly adjust the rates from the 5.25% today down possibly another half point, and then keep interest rates there for the rest of the year. Now, inflation has been inching down. It's hovering around 3.5% with a lot of demand still out there. So I think it's probably going to take longer than people expect. People are going to have a lot more patience. Most people want to have the Federal Reserve continuing lowering rates, but if inflation inches upward, they're going to have no other choice but to raise rates again. Now, at this point, it seems like everything is trending either sideways or slightly down, but to me, it seems more sideways. So again, I think we will probably see more of the same over the next year. Companies are still having strong earnings, and the stock market has seen good increases over time. Yet be careful for now and only invest in stable and proven stocks, bonds, and assets. Anything can happen on which political party has control at any period of time, as well as what is happening with the geopolitical environment in the world. Now, in answer to the question we started with, will prices come down? After over 4 decades of experiencing the ups and downs of political and financial changes in the USA and the world, as prices and costs go up, the prices rarely, if ever, come back down once they have been baked into the values and costs. If we ever see any reduction, it is usually based upon the commodity and the resources involved fluctuating, like oil and wheat, etc. But these costs fluctuate depending on weather, wars, and etc. So in my opinion, enjoy whatever reductions you may see, but always count on prices and inflation. That's just life as we know it. Please like, share, and subscribe now if you haven't done so yet. Remember that one of the laws of the universe is that when we share good into the universe to help others, the universe always repays us manyfold over what we give and share. Please leave your comments, questions, and ideas that you would like me to discuss, and I will respond. Thank you again.